Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Subtext Podcast Archives. These are the long-lost episodes of the Subtext that were originally produced between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, the Subtext moved to American Theater Magazine, and we've been producing the pod there monthly ever since. These time capsules are being shared here in their entirety, including plenty of outdated references and advertisements for events far in the past. If you enjoy them, please subscribe to the current podcast feed for the Subtext or stream new episodes on the website for American Theater Magazine. Thank you for listening.
I've been thinking about my father a lot lately. It started before Father's Day when I attended a run-through of Aditi Kapil's play Shiv, which explores a wonderfully complex father-daughter relationship. Then I started thinking about Sarah Ruhl's Eurydice and the happy sadness of that relationship. This led me to memories of Luis Alfaro's St. Jude, which is the greatest love poem for a father I have ever witnessed. You could say a lot of playwrights have daddy issues. It's a great tradition in American playwriting. I, no doubt, have daddy issues myself. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, and the last time I ever saw my father was when I was 10. He took my older sister and I to see Fantasia, which made me really angry at the time. I thought if you're going to take us to see a cartoon, you could have at least taken us to one where they talk. In my memory, Fantasia was a 2-hour-long classical music video. Anyway, I distinctly remember having the thought that my father didn't understand me. At the time, I did know I would never see him again. And for a long time, I didn't care. It wasn't until I was in my 30s I started to think about meeting him again, asking all the questions that I've been collecting over the past 25 years or so. I didn't know where he lived, what he did for work, or really anything about his life. I just knew this estranged biological father of mine was out there, and I would always be wondering about him, curious why he never reached out to me. I decided once I finished grad school I would find him and I would go to him and we would talk. I imagined this could be a dramatic surprise visit where I show up at his front door and I say, "Remember me?" It turns out I would never have the chance because he died only a couple months after I started crafting my plan. There would be no dramatic confrontation or explanation or reconciliation. Now I'm left with all kinds of conflicted feelings about the man I never knew, and I have to channel these feelings into my writing, which I've been doing lately with a new play exploring a long-estranged father and son meeting again and attempting to reconcile. I thought writing this new play would bring me comfort, but I've so fictionalized my story it's no longer about me. Not even close. I'm not feeling a catharsis. I'm realizing I won't be able to put my feelings to bed for a while, if ever. In the meantime, I'll try to keep the emotions honest, if not the stories, and hope over time I'll at least start to find some peace. And I'll have the great tradition of playwrights writing about their own fathers to keep me company. This episode is for Eugene O'Neill and Sam Shepard and Sarah Ruhl and Aditi Kapil and Luis Alfaro and all the other playwrights writing plays I can read and watch and find comfort in. Sure, their stories aren't about me, but then again, neither are mine. Welcome to the Subtext, the podcast where playwrights talk to playwrights about stuff usually left unsaid. The Subtext is sponsored this month by Geffen Playhouse, presenting Murder for Two. The LA Weekly calls this hilarious musical whodunit, quote, undeniably fun, an entertaining vaudeville-style romp delivered with gusto. Now extended by popular demand through August 2nd in the Audrey Skirball Kennis Theater at the Geffen Playhouse. Tickets, video, music, and more at geffenplayhouse.com. We got a sponsor. That's pretty cool. This month we're talking to a couple of theater revolutionaries, Joy Meads and Meg Miroshnik. Both are members of the Kilroys. Let's get started. Congratulating you and everybody on solving gender parity. Because as I understand it, with the second Kilroys list that came out, now there's no more gender problems. Am I right?
That's about right.
Yeah.
It's like when Obama got elected, racism ended in America.
Yeah, post-gender. That's right. Post-gender age. No more problems. Fixed it. All those theaters that programmed plays by women this year because of the list, you can just go back to normal. We're over it. We did it. Yeah.
That was just my clever way to kick things off. How clever was that? Was that pretty clever?
Pretty clever, yeah.
Yeah. But the truth is, it's not solved. It's still a real problem. And I'm really curious what you guys... Well, first of all, Joy Meads and Meg Miroshnik from the Kilroys are here. That's who you guys are.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you.
And you released the list last year, the first list. And I'm curious if you debriefed that process, what you did last year, and what you tried to do differently this year.
Yeah, well, so the list is a list of plays, industry recommended. We polled, last year it was 127 theater professionals, people who read new plays for a living, like artistic directors and literary managers. And this year it was 321. So we, more than doubled the number of people who we invited to respond. So I think a lot of what we were trying to, and so just to explain, they are recommending their top 3 to 5 plays that have had either one or no productions that they've encountered in the past year by women or trans playwrights. And out of that, we're taking the consensus, the plays that get the highest number of recommendations, releasing them as a list with the idea that theaters can use it as a season planning tool. And so I think one big thing that changed from 2014 to 2015 is just the size of that pool. As I said, more than doubled. The number of plays more than doubled that were recommended. So we were just sort of trying to achieve a greater breadth and especially geographic diversity. A few of the Kilroys worked very hard with the National New Play Network to try to get a theater, at least one theater from every state in the country to recommend.
Yeah, I think the first year we just went to people that we knew that were professional contacts, and we actually divided up the list. We all generated all of the people that we thought would open and return an email that we knew in the American theater to ask them to be recommenders. And we really stuck to people with whom we had professional relationships because in our experience, gender parity has not been something that people have been super eager to talk about in the past. Outside of a few folks, I think there has in the past been a level of exhaustion, and so there was that, and then we had no profile as a group. We had just founded, and so we started with folks that we knew last year, but this year, we were so excited to see the response last year. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of attention. And so it led to a few things. One is a bunch of people wrote us and said, like, hey, I'd like to nominate a play. And so we included those people. The only criterion is that you have to have read at least 40 plays in the last year. And so we expanded in that way. And then this year, because we thought the name The Kilroys, more people would be likely to open that email, we just brainstormed a bunch of people. We had a lot of help. And the other thing that was really exciting about that is that I think, we saw a broader range of writers and work represented on the list. It was not only more, but it was more diverse in pretty much every way, I think. And also we saw more unrepresented writers on the list, which was something that we were excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Joy's saying, a lot of that first year was kind of relying on our own, reputations and track records, as we were reaching out to people personally to say, we're serious about this. We're going to take you seriously. We're keeping responses anonymous. There was a lot of trust for those recommenders in the first year, and those emails were coming from our personal accounts. And then this year we were able to do a lot more sort of under the auspices of the Kilroys. So, emails could come, this is a very sort of nitty gritty thing, but just could come from a Kilroys account and might be opened, which we couldn't have counted on last year since nobody had ever heard of this entity that we just created.
Another thing that we did differently this year, which was very much in response to requests from our playwrights and from the theater community at large, is that we worked with the New Play Exchange, which is this tremendously exciting new tool that exists, to make the plays more accessible. So if you go on our website, the list of the top 53 most recommended plays, when you click on those titles, it'll actually take you to the listing of the New Play Exchange. And the playwright will have set up the page with as much information as they want to include about their play, with their preferred means of contacting them, and often with either a sample of the script or the entire script.
Yeah, and we also included like the cast breakdown and a log line about those plays directly on our website, because as Joy is saying, a lot of the requests that we got from both the playwrights and theaters around the country was just to sort of make that list more easily parsed, so if you're looking for a 5, actor comedy, there's at least some sort of amount of information you're going to get on our website to start to narrow down those plays. So, that was a huge thing. And also to make them more accessible, I think that sometimes it can be hard because agents are so busy to go through agents, especially for smaller theaters, to sort of get those inquiries taken seriously. I think that can be a struggle. And so this way, if there is a theater, somewhere that maybe doesn't have the profile that an agent is going to jump on that email right away, they have a way to sort of find out more about the plays themselves directly.
And then the one other thing that's different is, like, one of the things that we say about the list is that, so we're emailing people at a particular moment of time and saying, like, hey, right now at this moment, who are, the top 3 to 5 plays, the most excellent plays that you've read or seen in the last year that meet all of these criteria, right? And so it's really about the zeitgeist in a particular moment, right? It's not at all a list of, like, the most talented female playwrights of all time, female or trans. So one of the other things that's different this year is because we're in a different moment of time, because those people have been reading different plays, because I think each play has a life cycle of when they become widely read or widely seen. It's a very different group of playwrights, which was like so exciting to see. And I think year after year after year after year, what we're going to really have is we're going to have this record of this vibrant list of female and trans playwrights who were writing at this time, who were making work at this time. And it's just going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's been very actually moving to see that as it's occurred.
Why can't the American theater simply have a blind selection process and just say, we don't know the names of the authors, we'll just pick the plays based on the plays that are most inspiring to us?
It's super interesting, actually, that question. So one thing is that, so theater is a collaborative art form, right? So relationships do matter, right? If somebody, so I think one of the things that I work at Center Theater Group, and one of the things that we really strive to do is like build a fan base for artists over time, and to deepen relationships over time. Because I do believe, I worked at Steppenwolf before, and I really got to see the fruits of the way that relationships of trust, of long-standing, can lead to really, really exciting risk-taking and very daring work. So I think, that's part of it, right? So, is this a writer who we know, who we have an investment in, who we've worked with before? Is this a writer who has a relationship with this director that is is somebody that we are interested in building a relationship with? I think that's part of it, right? And there are upsides to that and downsides to that, as I very well know. And then I think the other thing is that I do think that theaters have an idea about wanting to have a name of a playwright, right? That you can sell a playwright by name. I'm a little skeptical about that, actually. CTG was part of some audience research that we just did with, it's this triple play audience research program. Oh yeah, Brian, you guys were part of that too. Sorry, that was the microphone. But so it was TDF, Theater Bay Area, and maybe just them, and a bunch of theaters around the country. I'm so sorry if I'm leaving out an important foundation.
Well, I'm not doing you any favors. I'm not helping.
Yeah. Anyway, but so they basically they had this research process where playwrights and theaters were interviewing audiences to talk about new work and specifically the perception of risk. And what I saw, I was part of a bunch of those interviews, and what I saw is that people, they couldn't remember the name of Bruce Norris, who won a Pulitzer Prize, who's widely produced, who we've produced twice in the past 3 years. They couldn't remember names of playwrights where I'm like, oh, that person's famous, right? So I think that we overrate how important a factor a playwright's name is. I think it has some importance, but I think it's not as much as we can. Then I guess the last thing I would say about blind processes is that I think that there's a type of, I think that actually even in a blind process, that we can see some unconscious bias affect the selection of plays based on, who the characters are, what the world is. And I think, and how much the reader recognizes, connects with that work in terms of what they've been taught over time to see as a successful work, right? So there's unconscious assumptions and expectations. And I think that all of that is really thorny and really tricky and very subtle and kind of difficult to talk about. But I know I've seen, you can see it in reviews, right? Like a female character who is unlikable, quote unquote, unlikable, I think can be responded to in a very different way, and often is, than a male character who is unlikable, or a female character who talks a lot is sometimes treated very differently by reviewers than a male character who talks a lot. So it's tricky, and I actually don't know that blind submissions are the answer, because I think really what we all need to do is become more aware of our own unconscious biases.
Meg, can you think of time, I guess, when you realized bias in your life?
Well, I think as a playwright, you're often not in the room when that conversation happens. It's hard to know when your play is passed on. That's actually not a room that you're generally in. So I don't know that any individual playwright is exactly aware of kind of what the conversation around their work is, because those honest conversations are generally not had in front of our faces. But I have been in rooms where someone else's work was discussed in a way that felt, maybe not entirely free of bias, or, that someone had a blind spot that, they were not aware of when they were talking about a play. And so I think for me, the focus has been on the overall numbers, and just knowing the abundance of work and excellent work by women and trans playwrights, and knowing that in the last season there were 24% of plays produced were by women living or dead. And sort of, I think looking at a larger picture for me is the thing that is motivating, as opposed to responding to like a specific incident in which, I felt that my play was not, treated in the manner in which I felt it deserved. I mean, we do talk about, like, I did write a play that featured a cast of 5 women and 1 man. And, in my mind, it was very clearly a play about that community of women. And in the sort of original draft of the marketing material, it was, written up as one man's story about returning to his hometown to gather women around him, So I think you do sort of occasionally encounter things, but I think for me, and I think, probably for a lot of writers, it's harder to have the courage or the, I think that I admit that my plays may not be perfect. I think you can sort of admit self-doubt into your evaluation of your own work. So it's easier for me to stand up for the work of others, knowing that, there's this larger picture of, of excellent work that's not being produced at the level it should be produced.
When you first started writing, were you aware that there was this discrepancy?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, this is actually a particular passion of mine is, because I got involved I grew up in Minneapolis, which has a really vibrant youth theater scene. And I started writing and performing there as, a really little kid, and actually had my first play produced when I was 14 years old by this amazing youth theater that held a slot in its season for work under written and directed by people under 21. So I think that, I was in a culture and had all of these female mentors too. So I think that I was not aware of that. I think when I started to become aware is as you kind of move through your career, and, I would say in my experience that youth theater scene was dominated by girls and women. And then, as you move forward, you find, some of those people just out of, discovering different passions or whatever, that it starts to become less, those ratios change to the point where, I was lucky enough to go to an excellent MFA training program, which I, deeply appreciated that experience. But it is a training program in which there are always 20% more male actors than female actors admitted. And part of that is because, training programs want to train the people who will work. And if you are sort of seeing a landscape that's dominated by Shakespeare and, 75% plays by male writers, it maybe doesn't make sense for them to train equal numbers of men and women. And so for me, a kind of goal in the body of my work is to create excellent, central, meaty, complicated roles for women, because I think if there's a demand, like those programs will have to train equal numbers of men and women, which you think maybe that's not a huge deal. There are excellent actors who don't have that training. But for me, that was a completely formative experience. And I made relationships that have continued to dominate my work going forward. And to think that there are 20% fewer women who are a part of those collaborations, who are not there when those theater troupes are formed, who don't become the muses of those writers and directors, I think that that is a problem. And so I think that this is not something that I consciously knew as a kid, because I have been doing it for a long time, but it's something that you sort of discover as you move forward. And I hear from, writers who are mid-career that they kind of notice that I think those percentages or the sort of the stature of male and female colleagues change over time, so that maybe you were coming up with some people and certain careers leap forward and others don't. And that has nothing to do with talent or persistence or, collaboration. So I think it's been a process over time.
I just passed the decade mark for having staff salaried positions in regional theaters, right? And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I had that exact same experience. I actually started out my artistic life as having a real enthusiasm for the classics, and a kind of skepticism about new work, crazily enough. And actually it was this thing of I started out working with a Shakespeare company where I saw two things happen. One is I was part of a new work development program called New Works, New Communities, where I got to work with playwrights like Naomi Azuka for an extended period of time and crafting a new play through a community-based process that was incredibly inspiring to me. So that's happening on one side, and that was really exciting, really galvanizing. And I saw the response to that work. The impact that I saw it had was so much greater because it was really, in conversation in a very deep way with present concerns of a particular community. So I saw that. And then on the other hand, I was at Cal Shakes, and where there's this ensemble of incredibly gifted actors, right? And every year we would kind of struggle to figure out, we would have no problem casting the men in the ensemble, but every year there would be women in that ensemble who were extraordinarily talented, who were kind of left out in the cold because there just weren't the roles, And after a while, it just kind of starts to chafe on you a little, the lack of complexity of, portrayals of women and people of color in those programs. So I was like simultaneously getting really enthused about new work and a little, deciding to see some other people other than William Shakespeare, at that point. But but I've also been around long enough so that the careers of the people that I started tracking, who I felt like were kind of, in my cohort of theater makers in terms of writers, right? Like people who I was really enthused about, I'm at a point where I'm seeing differential trajectories that are happening, and I'm starting to see, men who I thought were really, really brilliant starting out, like having more doors open to them than women who I thought were really brilliant growing when I was starting out. And in a way that I started to think about the generations of voices that have been lost in the past, right? Like all the very, very brilliant colleagues of all of these brilliant men whose plays we just don't know, right? And I started to worry about that same thing happening under my watch. And it just felt intolerable, actually. It felt like just the talent is too precious, and what these playwrights have to offer audiences across this country it's just too valuable to just let it slip away and disappear and be forgotten.
And I think this is maybe an opportune moment to point out one of the things that Joy was really passionate about was the idea that in order to be eligible for nominations of the list, that a play could have one production, because, we were seeing this gap between plays that reach revivable status. So, it's not enough for a play to have had one production. It needs the second and third and fourth and fifth. And then, it has the course of its life over that first couple of years, but then to fast forward 10 years later, and is that play considered canon enough that, it can be revived with the frequency that we see, like, for instance, Mamet's work revived, and that we were perhaps missing several generations of revivable women's work, that there were plays that didn't reach, that level for a number of reasons, and that, that we're missing generations of canon.
Yeah. So it's one level of success just to be produced in the first place, but there's another level of, I think you look at bias, it's just like these subtle little fingers on the scale that happen at all these different kind of decision points along the road. So when that play does have a first production, how is it received by the critics, and is it received fairly, or did they look for the protagonist in the wrong spot, right, and judge it according to that? That's one thing that can happen. And then if it does get well reviewed, does it go on to further life? Does it have further productions? And I feel like I see differential outcomes there as well for women. So and you need enough people to see that play when it's new and fresh to be able to even, think about it becoming part of the canon, becoming something that can be part of the stable of plays that gets revived.
I was so glad that Antaeus sort of broadened their definition of classic, and they programmed Carol Churchill's Top Girls last year. I thought that was really great, because I think that's one of the plays that we look at.
Yeah.
Mamet will be revived, but when is Churchill getting revived?
Yeah.
And I think even, I think relative to this sort of schema, that Churchill is a success story. I studied under Paula Vogel, who's a living library of colleagues who wrote amazing plays that just were lost to time. And so, I think of like Rochelle Owens and Corinne Jacker and these playwrights who I had absolutely never heard of before, she pointed me in their direction. And then to find that there was, a whole body of work that, hasn't even achieved sort of the level of Top Girls in terms of production, but is certainly worthy of it.
I want to talk about unconscious bias a little bit more, because I think it's really complicated and really challenging for people. I grew up with a single mom, and I grew up with a sister, and I grew up spending most of my family time amongst female cousins, and I had many female close friends growing up. I went to a college that was mostly female, and that was sort of my trajectory. And then all of my post-undergrad managers and bosses were all females. So I felt like I grew up into an adult who was a feminist and had no bias whatsoever. And then 2008 happened, the presidential election, and I read a blog entry by a friend of mine named Callie Kimball, who's a playwright, and she was writing about Hillary Clinton and the gender bias that she's receiving in the media. And I read this and I was kind of astounded. I found my own behavior being pointed out. Mm-hmm. I found myself saying, Hillary just doesn't look presidential. Mm-hmm. That was me. I'm one of the people who you would think would not have any of these biases. And I started to realize, holy shit, I do. Yeah. And if I do, oh my God, everybody does. And it kind of blew my mind. And I became slowly, since then, I'm trying to identify in myself more and more what my biases are. And I'm actively trying to do this. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to pat myself on the back, but I'm pointing myself out as an example. If I'm actively trying to do this, how many people aren't? How many people aren't aware and aren't trying to see the world clearer?
Yeah. Well, and we absolutely all have unconscious bias. I'm going to say, like having unconscious assumptions and expectations is not a bad thing in general, right? So, it's the reason that we know to be more careful when we look both ways when we're crossing the street on a busy road, right? Is because we have an unconscious expectation, right? And part of what that is we're just exposed to a lot of examples of something. And with our conscious mind, this is part of what we all do growing up, and our brains turn it unconsciously into a rule. Our brains are trying to keep us prepared for what's going to happen at any given moment in every area of your life. So you probably, you're making, maybe a million unconscious judgments every day, right? It's not problematic in general. In fact, it's highly adaptive in general. The thing that can become problematic though is when some of those unconscious expectations, judgments, biases, assumptions are drawn from growing up in, as we all did, in racist, sexist, heteronormative, etc. culture, right? Where most of the examples of anything that we are exposed to reflect those biased beliefs about different classes of people, right? So here's an example. So they've done a study where they expose people, study participants, to the exact same example of it's a meeting that's happening, and you have a CEO that's talking a great deal during that meeting, right? And in one study condition, the CEO is male, and the other study condition, the CEO is female, right? And they ask people to rate the competence and the leadership ability of that CEO, right? And they particularly talk about the fact that they talked a lot, right? And so in the male condition, the CEO who talks a lot is judged as being more competent and having more leadership ability, right? This is all happening it's based off of a written sample, right? A description. And in the female example, the female CEO is rated as being less competent and having less leadership ability. And it's a pretty big gap. It's like a 25-point gap on both measures, right? So why does that happen? Well, throughout all of our lives, how many, TV shows have we seen where there have been the annoying, super talkative mother-in-law or the woman who just runs on at the mouth, right? And how many shows have we seen where a woman gives a speech, is in a position of leadership, and she gives a speech and it is consequential and meaningful and worth listening to, right? As opposed to a man in each of those scenarios, right? So we're exposed to all of these examples throughout our life, and our unconscious minds can create a rule that's like, oh, women who speak a lot are annoying and don't have much worthwhile to say, and men who speak a lot are saying things that are important and are good leaders, and we should pay attention to them, right? And that's not about us being bad people. That's just about our mind creating rules in the way that our minds do. Our minds are pattern-seeking machines. That is what they look for, right? The good news is that the research has also found that it's very, very possible to interrupt those automatic assumptions by doing exactly that thing that you talked about, Brian, which is to learn about your biases and expectations and to observe them and to bring them out of your unconscious mind into your conscious mind. So it is subjected to conscious analysis. So like the fact that I thought that woman, who spoke so much in that meeting is annoying, was that really objectively true? How would I have thought the same about a man in her position? Or is that a little bit of my own gender bias kicking in, right? And that actually, studies have found that is very effective. The other thing that's very effective is, to kind of consciously expose yourself to non-stereotypical depictions of people of all kinds. So actually, it's a tremendous power that theater has. Like if we see plays or movies or TV shows or read books where we see people of color, women, LGBT people, trans people, people with disability, any kind of people about whom we might have a stereotype, who are behaving according to like the wide spectrum of human behavior that, each one of us possess, right? And in distinctive and idiosyncratic ways, that actually helps break down that kind of bulwark of bias that all of us have built up over the course of our lives. The other thing that the studies have found is a way to fight this is like to pay a lot of attention to that which is distinctive and individual about whatever the thing that you're judging is, right? So if you're a reader at a theater who is reading a play that is about people who are not often seen on our stages, really paying attention to that play and its specifics and its individuality, actually makes a difference on the extent to which your judgment of it will be affected by those unconscious expectations versus, the play that's actually in front of you.
Something that I've tried to do as a playwright is to make a sort of emergency list for myself too. So to kind of try to make some of those unconscious processes conscious. So I'll sort of keep a list in like my drafts folder of directors whose work I've responded to, because I find, that's an active thing that we can do when we're asked for, an off-the-cuff recommendation by a friend, to sort of make sure that that list is as diverse as we would hope it would be in our kind of conscious examination, so that you're not sort of, for myself, so that I'm not kind of replicating what is already out there in the world in terms of percentages. I think the list is actually a super useful tool to do that with plays too. I think as I'm starting to try to dig in, and, the Kilroys don't actually read any of the list plays. We're just administrators for this survey. And so as I'm trying to get to know some of those plays, to kind of consciously keep them on file in a way so that when you're asked, by somebody to recommend a comedy that you've recently come across that you love, that recommendation can not, again, replicate what is already out there. And I think for me, that feels like a really active way to try to make, some small change.
I had this moment. So speaking of times that we've experienced bias, so I had a moment in myself where it was pretty early on in my career. And, and one of the things I've had the power to do from pretty early in my career is to choose an intern, right? And I had this moment very early on where I noticed, like, I've always been somebody who believes in diversity and inclusion and, all of that. But I noticed that I had chosen 3 interns in a row who were white female vegetarians. And it's not like I was asking them in the interviews, are you vegetarian? Right? It's just that two things. One is like, we had a kind of a chord or a rapport in our interview where I was like, oh, we're going to work well together. And, and we just shared a bunch of the same cultural codes. And I was not aware of that at the time as something to look out for. But, there's studies that found that actually even just having a similar cadence of speech as the person that you're in conversation with can really affect your perception of them. So that's one thing at that point I was not aware of and became aware of. The other thing is that I was putting a lot of stock in, was I getting spontaneous emails from colleagues being like, oh, hey, this person applied for your internship. They were great, and of course that's valuable. But the thing that I realize is that, okay, if I am saying that I want to diversify a field that doesn't have enough diversity in it, saying that one of the criteria that you have to have in order for me to employ you is that you had to have already gotten through a door, right, in that field and already have been, it's just amplifying that bias instead of working against it. So what I did is I was really like, okay, actually, what are the qualities that I need this intern to have? I need somebody who can write well, right? I need somebody who's detail oriented. And then I just really consciously, and I also was like, I want somebody who thinks like independently and, is a good potential future leader of the American theater, right? Because that's the kind of grandiosity that I have but I mean, there's so few of us who actually get to work in this field, right? So, and once I did that and started applying that framework, well, all of a sudden the field of candidates started to look a lot different, right? And that's the thing is like the abundance is there. It's just that if we continue with the kind of glasses that our experiences and our expectations have given us, then we're going to perpetuate that which we've received, right? And so you can just take this moment, take a moment, which I did, to be like, okay, wait, what do I actually really need? And you can interrupt that kind of automatic process and replace it with something that's more conscious and more deliberative and actually will create a much better, more exciting field of talent.
Something I've noticed, shifting gears a little bit, something I've noticed since the gender parity discussion has entered the zeitgeist a few years ago, there's a lot of scorekeeping happening. So a season will be announced by a theater, and what a lot of us will immediately do is look at the boxes being checked, male, female, people of color, etc., and how many plays are being done by each and sort of keeping score and who's doing, what theaters are doing well, and then which theater are we like shaking our fist at. And this challenges this feeling I have myself as a fledgling playwright who is trying to emerge, and I'm a white, hetero male Eurocentric person, and I feel like I want myself to be one of those people. And I also know that if and when that time comes, I am a symbol of a failure for that theater in the eyes of somebody. So like the people who know me will be like, oh, great, Brian, you finally did it. But then to the people who don't, look at that as, oh, look, that freaking theater is doing another white guy play. That's wonderful. And I'm kind of caught in between these two places because I'm so supportive, and I still at the same time I'm trying to like promote myself, which is, I don't know, it's a hard place to be in. I don't need sympathy, but it's just this is what's going through my head all the time as I'm having conversations like this with you guys, and at the same time writing and sending out plays. There's not a question.
Yeah,
there.
I know. I think it's actually it's a painful moment, right? Actually, because I was about to say some of my favorite playwrights are white guys, but it's true. It's actually true. So I'm going to own that, and I feel very proud of. I advocated for and worked on a play by Jordan Harrison, the white guy last year that was a Pulitzer finalist, and I'm very proud of that play, and I think that play absolutely deserved the slot that it had. And the thing is that again we are in a moment of an abundance of like excellent playwriting. It's just such an exciting age to be in. But the good news is right now you're still doing just fine out there, white guys of America, right? Still disproportionately, actually.
I know, and that sucks.
Yeah.
And it sucks to be a white guy in that world where we are, you know, we are, I don't know, the ones with the gravy.
Well, I mean, my hope is that as we move towards more, I mean, I think the thing is like nobody is going.
I feel like I'm eliciting sympathy, and that's
no,
not my intention at all.
But I actually think it's really useful to talk about these feelings. I think it's very, very real, and it's something that I think about too, in a lot of different ways that I won't get into. But that there's a change that's happening that I think is very uncomfortable in a lot of ways. And one of those ways that it's uncomfortable is I am really proud of a lot of plays that I've worked on, a lot of plays that I know that are by white men, and dearly love, will read, would read them to my imaginary children as they fall asleep, would quote them at funerals and weddings and etc. Brilliant, brilliant works of theater. I think the thing that will be great once we come to an age where we are programming in a way that really reflects our communities is that we'll actually just be able to celebrate all of that tremendous diversity of work without saying I think the one play by, Brian J. Polak, who's that's in a season that alongside a play by, Kiara Hudes, alongside a play by Sylvan Oswald, alongside a play by, right? That, nobody's going to be upset about that. The thing that I feel becomes exhausting and heartbreaking is when it is only the plays by the white guys that get produced, or the plays by the white guys and then the one slot of other, and so I feel and I don't know, I think it's really natural to have some anxiety over the fact that we're seeing a big shift in the field, and my hope is that we're, once we move to a place of more inclusion, that it'll just be easier for everyone to celebrate all of the excellent work that's done. If that makes sense. But yeah, I guess I want to say I don't think it's wrong to have, to have some feelings of anxiety over that. I think that's natural, and yeah, and we'll get to a healthier place where it'll just we won't have to be also angsty about all of this. Also, it feels so good.
We won't have to have this conversation. That's the perfect world, right?
Yeah.
The moment we are not having this conversation, where the three of us are sitting here talking about something else entirely.
Yeah.
Are there, in addition or other than the list, are there other practical things that we can do differently to help get to that perfect world where we're not having this conversation anymore?
Well, I would love to just shout out a program that I think is going to be really exciting that I am particularly interested in, which is the Families Fund, which the Lilly Awards is innovating, and this is a fund to provide resources to parent playwrights to attend summer conferences, so men and women, or parents of any kind. And the idea is that some of the greatest showcases for new work are sort of not super accessible to people who are trying to raise families. And I do think sometimes that is a place where we're losing that kind of middle career, and I think we see this in the list too, that not all, but many plays that get the kind of consensus behind them in order to appear on the list have been showcased in different festivals or development conferences around the country, and that I think it's exciting to think about. That's a new way to think about how to get some of those playwrights into situations where you could win the lottery, essentially, which is what that experience feels like for a playwright, in terms of those odds. and to not be able to take advantage of it, I think is a sad thing. So I think that's really cool that the Lilly Awards is thinking and are thinking in those terms.
Yeah. I also feel like just a really easy act of activism that everyone can do is to go see plays of all kinds, but really, go see, when a play gets programmed that's by a woman, that's by a person of color, make sure you go see it. And then come out and talk about it in the specifics and idiosyncrasies of that play, like why it's brilliant, why it's amazing, in ways that are really particular to what that play is trying to do, and less about the identity of the writer, right? There's this really interesting thing that happened recently, where there's been a production of Ray Pamatmat's beautiful play, Edith Can Shoot Things and Hit Them, in Boston at Company One. And it's a play I had the pleasure of seeing a few years back, and I cried 2 different times, even though I was sitting in an audience full of my colleagues, so I was trying to be real cool. But yeah, it's just like, it's a play that I feel like has a tremendous emotional power and force that is, kind of rare actually to see. And it's a beautiful play. So there was a review of that play where the reviewer, it's a pretty poor review of the play, which I think is a mistake to begin with. But then, and the reviewer specifically said, Ray is Filipino American, and the characters are Filipino American, but the play does not center on the fact of their Filipino identity. It is not written as a kind of ethnographic, artifact for us all to look at and be like, oh, that's what being Filipino is, And so this reviewer said, quote, "I wish the Filipino culture were more on display," unquote, which I thought was a really interesting turn of phrase, because it does make it seem as, that impulse to see the kind of ethnographic object, right? The same thing that made people, put Native Americans on tour in the 19th century, right?
Well, and the Globe reviewer ups the ante a little bit by saying, "I can't believe they weren't encountering problems due to their ethnicities in school."
Why didn't the playwright talk about the prejudice that they encountered in school? And I would say quite simply that's because that's not a play that Ray Pamatmat was writing. And so I think part of what we can do to actually forward this, to make progress in this area, is to do playwrights the respect of watching the play that they are writing, not the play that we assume that they will write, not the play that will teach us that, not the play that places whiteness at the center, right? So this guy wanted Ray Pamatmat wanted Ray to write a play about Filipino Americans that put whiteness at the center, because it's about, the encounters that those Filipino Americans had with white people. And it's it's about a kind of explaining of the culture, for white people. And I think that's not the world that we live in. Actually, the world that we live in, here in LA, the percentage of the population that is non-Latino white is 30% here in LA, right? And many cities across America, right? You cannot assume whiteness as a default. It's just not the world that we live in. So we shouldn't try and assume that about our plays. We should really try and look for what is that playwright trying to do, and to notice that in idiosyncrasies. Another thing that you can do is you can use words like brilliant and genius to describe female playwrights and playwrights of color, because it's really interesting. Those are words that we are very quick to apply to white men and not as quick to apply to female playwrights and playwrights, or female women and people of color. And that's backed by research, right? And I think that has an impact.
What are the words being used to describe writers of color and females?
Hardworking. Yes. Hardworking. Diligent. And I can give you some links to articles about that if you want, Brian, to share, because it's a basis of research, and I think that has an impact. So when you it's interesting. So we actually saw a lot of plays produced off of the list last year, which was really exciting to see. There's some plays that were not produced that I think are really exciting and bold and innovative and daring and audacious, right? But I think that, so if you were a theater who is going to take a risk on a play that is theatrically audacious, that is very unconventional, by maybe an unknown writer, you want that writer to be brilliant, to be a genius. You want to feel that this is a work of genius and brilliance, right? And if we have these unconscious expectations that kind of prime us to see white male writers in that way, as opposed to other writers, then it's just less likely that, that play that is by the unknown writer, that is theatrically daring and unconventional, will be produced. Just a little qualification about what I just said. There are many, many plays that are theatrically daring and innovative off of the list that were produced, but I do think that there's a kind of constellation of like unknown writer, or there's differential factors around some plays that I think should have been produced that weren't.
How is it possible that a play on the list this year was recommended by 20 people and hasn't had like a gazillion productions? I can't even fathom that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing for people to look at when they think about, we get some flack, and I can understand why. I definitely understand why for including plays that have had the single production. But yeah, I think that play, it was the play that had 20 recommendations was Claire Barron's You Got Older, right? And it was a big success for them. It was a critical success, right? And it's had the one production, and I haven't seen any other announcements of other productions of that play. So, I think that is kind of a case study, actually, in why it's important that we include plays with a single production in the list.
Something that I love by following a lot of people like you, both of you, and the Kilroys on social media is calling out the bias now. And this is the great thing about social media, is it doesn't exist in a silo. It doesn't get printed in the paper and then disappear. It now exists in the internet, and you can share it, and you can say, look, here's the exact quote. Mm-hmm. Here's the exact quote that the Boston Globe reviewer is saying about this play. And people are learning. I'm learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, like, this is so important. I feel like, for all of this, part of why we're in theater is because we love theater people, and like, I have never worked with a person in this field who I'm like, that is a person who is a conscious bigot, who is like really working to keep women down, who's really trying not to produce people of color. And in fact, I find the opposite. Like, I feel like people, they will talk about diversity and they really believe it. And I will see that they will take actions to, try and mitigate that. But the problem is that we've been talking about racial and gender bias as it appeared, a couple generations back, right? So we've been thinking about it as this thing that happens where, these people who really fundamentally believe that women and people of color are inferior, act consciously to keep them out of positions of power, right? Out of animus. And that's not what it is now. Actually, it's good people who just haven't had the moment where they've become aware of those unconscious judgments, and who are kind of, and who are continuing, who are
perpetuating.
Thank you, perpetuating. Sorry, the bias that they received, and so that idea of like work, I just think it's something that we all have to do, and it's not, it's just becoming conscious, and like actually, it's like a new set of glasses. Like once you put them on, you see differently, and it becomes easier and easier and easier over time. It's just taking that moment to be like, you know what? I'm going to start to pay attention to this. And then you start to see it everywhere. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a good place to stop. Anything to plug? You guys take a moment to plug something? You can invent something.
Well, so go to thekilroys.org, take a look at the list. If there are any of those plays that are being done in your area, go to see them. Go to see other plays that aren't on the list that are getting done. And also, I want to say, as a literary manager and not a playwright who's a member of the Kilroys, like these playwrights that I'm working with, they sacrifice writing time to advocate for other women. But part of why I was so excited about this group is that it is a really extraordinary group of writers. I want to say, take a look at the 11 playwrights who are in that group. And if you have a chance to see any plays by any of them, you should take that chance, because they're really extraordinary talents.
And I would also add, if you are a theater or a playwright who's been an honorable mention or is on the list, or a theater producing one of those plays, to let us know, because we would love to hear. We're just starting to hear some success stories coming out of theaters and plays that made connections via the list, and we would love more of those, and to just be able to kind of tout some of those successes for those plays and theaters and playwrights.
Yeah, and if you have, also the other plug I want to make is for, like we just did this. We had a little party conversation that got a little out of hand, and we wound up founding this group that's been, a big organizing principle, I think, in all of our lives since then. But I also just want to, the thing that's been really exciting about that is to see the power that just a group of people can have working together to make something. And so I want to, tout like all of the other people who are doing their own work, on different aspects of this problem. So, the Lilies, I said feminist salon, Christine Evans and the folks that did the We Exist list, like LAFPI, like there are so many people who are working on this issue. And then, the new Blackfest, there are an incredible amount of people who are, really working to celebrate all of the talent in this country right now. And so, raise a glass to them and just to all of the people who kind of see an aspect of a problem that they feel like, I think I could have a little impact on that, and just decide to do it. It actually winds up being easier than you think.
Yeah, it was a really moving experience. So in order to, one of the challenges and joys of kind of administering the list is that since the recommendations happen anonymously, we don't have contact information for the playwrights. So Carla Ching and I tracked down, I think I sent like 230 emails or something in order to notify list playwrights and also honorable mentions this year that they had been nominated, and just to confirm, that we had the correct information about them. And so it was a really moving experience to track those people down out of the blue, to send them an email with this good news, and then to hear the responses. And for me, it's opened up so many imaginative possibilities, because this is a thing that we just made up in each other's living rooms 2.5 years ago, and people were like freaking out that they had gotten it. And that was just, I think, the most agency that I've ever felt as an artist, to be able to kind of bestow that sort of honor on another artist. It was very moving and exciting. And to me, it just made my world so much bigger, because now I'm thinking, how else can I, do this? Like, how else do I sort of not wait around for gatekeepers? I'm not a person who ever felt compelled to self-produce, and I think that is like that category of people. But now it's like, okay, so what can I do? Like, what can I do to sort of not wait around, but to make opportunities and to bestow recognition on other artists? It's really exciting, and I think I would recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, it's like we all had this latent power that we discovered by tapping into it, and it's just been such an exciting and inspiring and generative experience for all of us. So
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Brian.
I loved this conversation, and I hope you did too. I want to reiterate to some people who might be listening, uncovering my own unconscious bias has been an incredible challenge, but I think it is vital as I learn to understand myself and the world better. And I hope you do the same. Dear people of the American theater, go to thekilroys.org, check out the list, read the plays, and then produce them. Special thanks to Bill Bordy, whose generosity has allowed LA Stage Alliance to launch At This Stage magazine, which is live online now at thisstage.la, and is chock full of articles about the live theater scene in Los Angeles. The theme song is by International Pen Pal. Check them out on iTunes. And a big thank you to both Danny Oliver and Anna Urena, who are the brains behind this operation. Keep in touch with the Subtext by following on Twitter @SubtextPodcast. The email address is thesubtextpodcast@gmail.com if there's anything you'd like to say, or if you have somebody you'd like to hear interviewed in an upcoming episode. That's it for now. Thanks for listening through the end.